Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer afternoon briefing with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin to go over all the latest developments at Easter Road. Today we'll be talking about the future of Youan, the League Cup draw reaction to that, and a potentially huge move for former High B Josh Doig over in Serie A. So without further ado, let's get into it. But first of all, Patrick, how are you?
I'm
Being
good,
rude.
thank you.
How
Yeah,
are you?
busy,
You all right?
busy day.
Busy
Yeah,
day. I
busy
know.
day, but it always is this time of year. If it
Yeah,
wasn't busy, I think we'd be concerned. So take it in a stride.
absolutely. Just before we crack on, folks, just a wee message for our sponsors. Exciting news from our sponsor, actually, MPH Group. They're opening a brand new kitchen showroom in Dunfermline, Fife, with a VIP Vegas themed launch weekend, and that's from June the 14th to the 16th, 10 a.m. in the morning until 6 p.m. at night. There'll be roulette games, instant win prizes such as 10% off services, free boiler services, and a chance to enter a draw for even bigger prizes. If you land on zero, you'll get entered into a grand draw for a 4-night stay at Trump Tower in Vegas with a helicopter tour thrown in there as well, because why not? Don't miss out. RSVP now at www.launch.mph.group to secure your spot. So, Patrick, let's get straight into it then. Yuan, it's an open secret now, really, that Hibs have received a seven-figure bid from a still as yet unnamed French club for the French winger. Obviously, last few weeks of the season there, Yuan was injured, didn't feature in any of the kind of final match day squads, finished the season as certainly is among Hibs' most productive players in terms of goals and assists. But it's fair to say that he's not won over everybody in the Hibs fan base. He still remains a bit of I think quite harshly, a frustrating, kind of divisive, polarising figure, almost just because he does that kind of have that inconsistency in his game. So it's quite a significant offer for Hibs to consider. For it, obviously, it'd be a significant profit on a player that they signed last summer as well. So do we think, could this be the end? Is this a good time? Do you think the right time for maybe Yuan to move on from Hibs is kind of as detrimental to the team as that might be?
I think it probably is. You look at his past. I mean, it's almost a bit like Mizian Belida in like kind of microcosm, or maybe not quite microcosm, but it's like a version of that. In that, when you look at his past, when he came to Hibs, it was maybe a feeling of a player who'd lost his way a little bit, who just needed to be at a club where he was going to be sort of like loved by the fans. He was going to be getting opportunities to show what he could do, and I suppose kind of put himself in the shop window over the longer term, because obviously he was on loan for the first season with an option to buy. I think Hibs then activated that, made it permanent, and I think a more productive season this time around. Compared to his first season in Scotland. And when you look at what he provided in the way of goals and assists, I think 10 goals, 11 assists. You look at what he provided and you look at what Mizian provided as well, it doesn't really bear thinking about where Hibs would have been without their sort of contributions in front of goal. But, despite that, as you say, quite a polarising figure, I think didn't ever fully convince everyone of his qualities, which seems a bit bizarre because, he passes the eye test. I think you talk to fans of other clubs and, all of them maybe say, well, Yuan, one of the better players, at the club. Obviously, Mizian coming in kind of stole the limelight a little bit, but I think over the course of the last two seasons, you'd certainly say that Yuan has been one of the sort of more consistent performers for Hibs in terms of what he's delivered in front of goal. There's, when you consider the fact that he is a winger, he is going to be inconsistent, and there's that to deal with, and then I think there's also I know he did sort of trap back. He did get stuck in defending sometimes, but it wasn't his strong suit. I think would probably be the best way of putting it. And I think we saw it. I think we probably saw it more times this season than last season. And I think maybe the way that Nick Montgomery was trying to play possibly didn't, use into his full capacity. And I think, if you've got a player like Yuan, you don't want them in your defensive third. You want them in the final third. You want them doing things, making things happen. And you could sort of pick out sort of 3 or 4 kind of pretty major incidents in games where he either lost the ball or, didn't come out top in a 50-50, and it led to Hibs conceding a goal either directly or indirectly. We're not going to sit here and apportion blame to who was at fault for every goal conceded by Hibs this season. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. But
how long have you got?
yeah, but I think it's fair to sort of point the finger and say, well, he should have done better with that. But at the same time, I don't think that sort of like overwrites what he's done in front of goal. And I think, it is. If he's not at Hibs, then it'll be noticed. Like I imagine like the club will have to work really hard in the transfer window to bring in somebody, or bodies plural, who are capable of filling the gap should he leave. And I just think it does feel like it's got to a stage where he's maybe I don't know what the terminology would be, but he's maybe outgrown Hibs a little bit. Like there's been sort of difficult moments with the fans. I know there's been social media stuff. It was quite widely reported that I think it was the Supporters Player of the Year bash that he sort of thanked people for not booing him when he got an award. And you think that's not a great sign of relations being particularly good between player and fans. It's also the fact that he has been away from France for quite a few years now. He was obviously in Switzerland, spent time in Belgium. He's been in Edinburgh for the past 2 years, and he might just feel it's time to go back home. I imagine he probably wants to test himself at a higher level. And I mean, I know a lot of people are looking at France and they're looking at Bill Foley and they're looking at Lorient and they're making they're putting two together and getting 5. But I'd be surprised if it wasn't like a League One side who are looking at him. I mean, you could always go back to his former club Nantes, for instance. That's one possibility. I'd imagine, in terms of like where he wants to go and where he sort of sees himself. Because you look at Hibs over the past few years, really since they got back into the top flight after the sort of 3 years in the Championship, haven't been too many players who've hit double figures for goals and assists in one season. Like Martin Boyle's done it a couple of times. I think Scott Allen managed it once, maybe twice. I think Stevie Mallon, and beyond that, it's that itself I think shows you how sort of important a player he's been. And you'd really have to kind of trust the recruitment team to come up with another gem similar to Youan, because I think when he arrived there was a sort of like bit of an unknown quantity about him. He's been playing in Switzerland, and then there's the rumours of like a falling out with the manager. He goes to Belgium, it doesn't work out. But I think on his day, a really exciting player to watch. Really, able to create something out of nothing. Frustrating, yes. But it is a kind of tired trope, but it is true. If he was doing it consistently week in, week out, he wouldn't be at Hibs. Mm-hmm. So it's been a sort of roller coaster 2 seasons, I think, for Hibs fans with Youan. I think he's been responsible for some really sort of like good moments, like the double at Tynecastle, setting up Martin Boyle for the equaliser against Hearts on his sort of second debut for the club. And there's been other goals as well, and obviously the kind of infamous sleeping celebration. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him move on this summer. I think it's probably what the player wants. It's probably best for the club in terms of making a maximum profit on him, because his stock is high. But it does feel a little bit like he'd be one of those players who fans might not, or some fans might not truly appreciate what he sort of offered until it's no longer there. Not to say that I don't think that was the case with every fan. I think there were many fans out there who did know exactly what he did, and what he brought to the team, especially in the past sort of season alone, where Dylan Ventie's had his struggles in front of goal. Martin Boyle's maybe not been performing to the best of his ability, and everything else that's just happened in the past sort of like 9 or 10 months. So an interesting one to watch, but like I say, I wouldn't be wholly surprised to see him move on.
Yeah, I think he'd certainly be missed, wouldn't he? I mean, I think you make a good point there in terms of like there are other attacking players this season who have not delivered anywhere near what Yuan has, but don't seem to divide opinion in quite the way that Yuan does. I think it was when you mentioned, Scott Allen there, and it just kind of took me back to when we spoke to him a while ago, and I remember asking him, why it sort of clicked so well for him at Hibs, and he says like, fans here, they do like players who can get you off your seat. Basically, that's what they kind of pay the money for. Guys who can produce exciting moments, kind of get the crowd going and stuff like that. And Youan was certainly in that bracket, but I mean, it keeps coming back to that point that he was a kind of or still is sort of a polarizing figure. But I think maybe why it was the case with Youan so much is sometimes it was a lot of the time it seemed to be kind of one extreme with the other. With Youan, like he'd either be, when he was on it, he was sensational, but when he wasn't, it wasn't just so much a quiet game. It would be, he just seemed to be one of those players sometimes where if things aren't going right for him, then absolutely everything goes wrong. And I think maybe the frustration at times with some fans is maybe born from the fact that they know exactly what he's capable of. And so it kind of then heightens that, kind of frustration when he's not quite on it. But, I do think, sometimes we don't appreciate these kind of players as much as we could do in Scottish football, because there's a lot of guys, I think I wrote about this in a piece about Yuan last week. There's a lot of kind of guys who are in this league who are functional, efficient, maybe not below 6 out of 10 every week, but very rarely go above 8. And then to have a kind of a player like Yuan who is maybe at a bit of one extreme to the other at times, there does seem to be, and it's not just exclusive to Hibs. I think I've seen it happen at plenty of clubs where the negatives are maybe focused on a bit more than the positives, because he is a flair player. He's got this perception around him that he's not particularly interested in defending. And I think, like you said there, I don't think that's a lack of effort type thing. I just think he's maybe not particularly reliable in a defensive sense at times. I remember looking at his defensive numbers, and it's not like that he's not up there in terms of, I think there was one point in the season where he was actually kind of leading the team in terms of the number of times he would press the ball, try to look into the counter press and look into the cover in the opposition half. So I don't think it was ever anything like that, but he was just maybe prone to that kind of lapse of concentration, and maybe a wee bit, he felt like sometimes like one of those unlucky players at times where his lapse of concentration always ended up having consequences. It felt like every time he switched off, something happened. Whereas, that is probably a bit unlucky in a sense, where you probably get a lot of guys who switch off during games and get away with it. But unfortunately, Yuan never seemed to do. So yeah, I think if he does go, it's, he will be missed, but I think you're probably right in saying that he's kind of maybe drifted up, he's maybe outgrown Hibs in a sense. So the responding to fans on social media and stuff maybe gives you a sense of where his head is at. Some of that I feel was really quite uncalled for, messaging the guy directly and stuff like that. It's just it kind of sours things for a guy who has kind of provided a lot, and as you say, you kind of shudder to think where Hibs would be without him and Mizian. In terms of the money as well on offer, I think in terms of the kind of size of scale of the rebuild, that Hibs are going to have to address several different positions. I think it probably makes sense from a financial point of view as well, doesn't it? To take in, if that is the money on offer, to then take that and kind of use it to address other areas.
It does, yeah, because if Hibs are raking in, 2.5 million, from selling Yuan, that's 2, maybe even 3 players you could bring in, and you might not be able to get a player in the same mold, but then you might not need that. There's probably you could get 3 players who together would be would have the same sort of impact on the team as Yuan did alone. But I think it's also worth remembering that with that bottom 6 finish, and obviously the further down the bottom 6 you finish, the sort of less prize money you get. On top of that, I mean, I know there's a lot of fans who are looking at the Black Knights and sort of thinking, yeah, beauty, like 6 million. That's not all going to go on, on transfers. Like, as we know, it's been used for a variety of different things, and I just don't, I'm not really expecting to see, him smashing transfer records this summer. And I think, that's. I mean, obviously the size of the rebuild is, obvious, but it doesn't strike me as the sort of thing you can do in one transfer window.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not meaning to sound like a manager here and say, you need 2 or 3, maybe even 4 transfer windows to turn a squad around. But, I do wonder whether, I think Hibs have to be smarter this summer in terms of recruitment. I think they need to, first of all, they need to sort of work out what it is they're doing in terms of, kind of planning. Are they sort of just, plucking wild card players from, like the regional leagues in Germany, like they did with Melida? Are they getting in players like Youan, who've maybe lost their way, but they want to try and, give them a platform to, perform and be happy again? Or do you go down the route of, what they were doing previously, I think under Jack Ross, when you were sort of looking at, talent at other clubs in Scotland and sort of saying, come to us, we'll make you better and we'll give you the opportunity to move on. Rather than the kind of scattergun approach that we've seen in recent seasons. Like, it needs to be sort of clearly defined. And I think if you've got, if you can sort of have, that additional, we'll call it 2 million for argument's sake. If you've got that 2 million, then that can make a big difference. And I think, I think rather than, if you didn't have that, then you might be looking at trying to limp through the first half of the season and hoping for the best, and then getting to January and trying to do what they've done, this season just past, where you try and find like a kind of marquee player to come in to, effectively do the business in the second half of the season. And Hibs have had quite a lot of joy doing that in, the last sort of like 10 years or so. When you think back to, obviously, Scott Allen coming in January, you've had Florian Canberry, Jamie McLaren linking up really well. Greg Docherty to a sort of lesser extent coming in the January and, hitting, I think, can't remember what it was, but he had, quite a few goal contributions in, I think it was just 8 games or something like that. So if you can get the right players in January, then, obviously it makes sense to go for it. But, given the kind of state of flux Hibs have been in for so long, they need to have a sort of clearly defined idea of what they're doing with recruitment, which, you'd imagine the appointment of Malky Mackay as sporting director will, that'll sort of help on that front. But, if they do have more money, then I think that could make life a bit easier for, bringing in players who they can kind of build a squad around, rather than sort of bringing in guys on sort of like, half season long loans who, like in Mizian's case, you think he's not going to be here in 6 months' time, or if he is, then, it's very, very slim chance of it happening. So, I think for the greater good of Hibs, being able to sort of like make such a profit on, what is a good player, and, sort of let him continue his sort of journey to the top. You're staying true to that. You're staying true to that sort of model of, come to Hibs and we'll give you a platform to perform, and then you can advance your career. But also potentially helping, the club of the future as well. So I think it's a win-win on both fronts.
Yep, certainly could be. So we're barely into the close season, but football doesn't stop for very long at all these days. So today we got our first glimpse into how next season is going to pan out, with the draw for the League Cup group stage back to being the Premier Sports Cup again this season. If I've got that right, haven't I? Yeah,
that's just called the League Cup. Yeah,
is it right? Okay, for simplicity's sake, we will be referring to it as the League Cup. So
call it the Skull Cup. People know what we're talking about. So
yeah, I know. I do. I've actually heard people still calling it the Skull Cup. So that's kind of impressive dedication to the nostalgia on that front. But yeah, the draw for the group stage today, and I think this is a draw that will really kind of it's maybe a litmus test of who is glass half full type character or a glass half empty. If you're a glass half full,
you're just talking about you and me.
Well, maybe no. I'd say we're glass half full, wouldn't you? I think we are. I don't know, because I've not asked your opinion on this group stage draw yet. But I think for some people, will be looking at it as a kind of a clutch of very, very winnable games here, and others might be looking at it as, these are several banana skins. I think one thing we can say with absolute certainty is there is probably going to be at least one long haul trip all the way up the road to either Elgin or Peterhead. Those two clubs in there, and then it's Queen's Park and Kelty Hearts making up the rest of the group. What do you make of the draw?
On a personal level, quite annoyed that there's not going to be a chance for me to tick off any more of the 42. I'm getting very close to the full set, and a little bit irritated that I didn't have the chance to sort of finish that before the league season had got underway. But putting that aside, not going to let it get to me. I think it could have been a lot worse. You're looking at a lot of the teams in there, and you think there are, as you say, there were some banana skins in terms of who they could have got, and also where they could have been. Yeah, I mean, it's. I think we always see shocks in the group stages of the League Cup, and I will admit, despite being a glass half full kind of guy, just in general, I think looking at that, I was sort of thinking which one of those is going to be the one that's going to be a bit sticky for Hibs. And obviously we saw them struggle against Falkirk. When during Lee Johnson's tenure, we saw them struggle against Morton as well. Although obviously in the end it didn't matter because of the administrative cock-up that saw Morton given a 3-0 win. So I think, so long as they can avoid anything like that, then it'll be progress. But no, I think you're right. Being serious, there are it's a good collection of games, and if it is going to be away to Elgin, then it is a bit of a hike, but it could have been a lot worse. I think you look at who was in the other groups. There could have been, there could have been a bit more travel, and I think it should, it'll hopefully give the new head coach an idea. Going into the league season, I don't think it's a time to experiment with formations and personnel. I think you do that in your pre-season friendlies and you get that out of the way. If you want to try that central midfielder at right back, then the time to do it is in a friendly against a team half of us haven't heard of behind closed doors, so that nobody sees how it goes.
Not at Elgin on a Wednesday night.
No, absolutely not. Not at Falkirk on a Wednesday night either. I think it needs to be sort of strongest team possible. It is sort of quite a heavy schedule. You've got, I think, weekend, midweek, just to kind of get the games out of the way. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a bit of squad rotation, but I certainly wouldn't be. I wouldn't be wanting to see sort of like 8 changes going into one game and then 7 going into the other. I think you want to try and get your first choice starting 11 as much as possible, because obviously the transfer window goes on. You don't always get who you want in the first sort of couple of weeks of summer, but I think you want to get the team sort of gelling as early as possible. I think you want to just try and build something so that when you get to the league season, you can just sort of essentially pick up where you left off from the League Cup. And just if you have got some sort of, if you've built up a head of steam, if you've got some momentum from the cup games, to bring that into the league games, because when you consider how many teams are in Europe, and as we saw with Hibs this season, you can get results in Europe and then you can be really flat at the weekend. Is this me looking desperately for a positive with Hibs not in Europe? Yes, of course it is, absolutely. But I think there is a real possibility that with the 5 teams in Europe, 5 teams in Europe, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. My maths fails me every now and then. That's why I'm a journalist and not a mathematician. Anyway, it does give Hibs a chance to kind of build up some momentum going into the league season, because you really don't want to be in a position where you're struggling at the start of the Premiership campaign. That's got to be your bread and butter. That's got to be where you're looking for getting some points on the board early doors, because as we saw with this season, it can make all the difference when it comes to the time for the split. So I think decent tests. I think the head coach will learn a lot about the players from those games. None there that I think can be taken too lightly.
No.
So I think the main thing is that it could have been a lot worse in terms of who they could have got, but obviously it depends on how the head coach kind of assesses the competition. I think so long as they take it seriously, then it should be fairly straightforward for Hibs. Should be.
It's one of those. It's one of those groups that demands what people always call professional performances, isn't it?
Yes.
But
Get the result.
I mean,
ask questions later.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it is a bit of summer football, isn't it? A lot of the time we're crying out. We seem to be crying out for that in Scotland. So yeah, we'll leave that one behind on a positive. So just to finish off, really kind of interesting story development at the moment involving former Hibs fullback Josh Doig. Patrick, your understanding is that obviously Sassuolo were relegated from Serie A at the end of last season, but now Doig is attracting interest from Roma and Jose Mourinho. So what can you tell us about that?
What's Jose Mourinho got to do with it?
Oh, he's not the manager anymore, is he?
He's not been the manager since January. Aye, yeah.
Is he? God, well, you can see how up to date I am with Serie A these days. Yeah.
Parma went bust, by the
Really?
way. It all went belly up for them.
Did something happen with Juventus as well? Did they get done for match fixing or something? Was that a wee while ago now? Well, there you go. Well, I mean,
every day's a school day on the Hibs Observer.
Yep, that's the dangers of live broadcasting, isn't it?
This is just for you.
That. You know. I cannot take. I'm making a habit of these, aren't I? There's the one where I didn't know where Annan was the other week, and now apparently I don't know who the Roma manager is.
It's Daniele De Rossi, by the way.
So it is. Yeah. Oh, that takes you back, doesn't it, De Rossi?
But to be fair, if the reason that you don't know who the Roma manager is because you've just been so invested in covering Hibs for the Hibs Observer,
exactly,
giving our readers and subscribers the best possible Hibernian journalism, I think we can excuse your lack of knowledge.
The Hibs Observer is a 24/7 endeavour. I've got absolutely no time for silly details like who is the manager of Roma. But I suppose if Josh Doig is potentially heading there, I might have to write about it at some point, so I should maybe get clued up on it. But yeah, taking it back to my original question, what can you tell us about this? Yeah, what can you tell us about this story of Josh Doig being linked to a team where Jose Mourinho is definitely not
the manager? So yeah, I think it's, we see this quite a lot in Italy, that when teams get relegated, there's something of a kind of fire sale of their kind of best players. And it looks like that's what's going to happen with Sassuolo. Obviously relegated after 10 years in the top flight, finishing second bottom. Not ideal. Josh Doig obviously signed for them from Hellas Verona in January after a bit of a strange transfer saga where it looked like he was all set to move to France with Marseille, and then Sassuolo came in at the last minute with, I think, a better financial offer for as far as Hellas were concerned, and he ended up staying in Italy and making the short trip south to Sassuolo. And it's been a difficult season for them. I think he's played 16, 17 games, something like that, a couple of assists. And they did have some decent results towards the end of the season. They beat Inter Milan, they got a draw with Lazio, and I'm just showing off now, by the way, just to really make you feel bad about not knowing who the Roma manager was.
I've never even heard of half of these teams.
But it seems that Roma, obviously, Europa League semi-finalists, finished sixth. They'll want to do better next season, and Daniele De Rossi, who took over from Jose Mourinho in January, as we discussed, I think is very keen to kind of shape his squad for next season. And what's interesting, I think, is that we knew Doig as more of a kind of left back, maybe a left wing back at a push when he was at Hibs, but in Italy, I think he's almost been playing as a left winger at times. So he's kind of got that. Talking about Youan earlier with the defensive side of his game, but I think that having a player who can get forward like Doig can. I mean, he got 2 goals with Hellas Verona, which is not a bad return in your first season in Serie A. He gets forward well, but he's got that sort of defensive strength as well. So you can see why he'd be an attractive option for like any of the sort of top teams in Italy. I don't know whether he's going to, but if the move comes to fruition, I don't know exactly. I don't know if he's going to be a starting player. I don't know if he's going to start every week. But squads like that, when you're competing in Europe, when you're trying to trying to win the league or finish as high at the league as possible. You've got the domestic cups and everything. You need a big squad. You need a talented squad, and you need players who can play in more than one position, more than one system. So I don't think it's I think it's very much in its infancy as a potential move. I think there has been, as I understand it, there has been sort of contact made between the two clubs. So Roma are kind of testing the waters just to see what the story is regarding Doig's position. But I think the chance to sort of remain in Serie A, the chance to play for Roma, the chance to potentially play in Europe, play under De Rossi, play with some of the people at the Stadio Olimpico. It's something to think about for Doig. You can understand why we'd make that move. He doesn't strike me as the sort of player who just he doesn't make moves based on on money. It's there's a lot that goes into it. Obviously joining Hellas Verona, there's always been a lot of clubs interested in him when transfer windows come around. And I think that it'll be an interesting one to watch develop. He obviously is highly rated. He's been linked with clubs in France, Denmark, Italy, Germany, England. So I think because Sassuolo did get relegated, I think we could see quite a few players moving on, and we shall see what happens. But potentially a really an interesting move, a really good move for him if it does come to fruition. But like I say, early days yet. I think there's still a long way to go in this one if anything is going to happen. But just quite a move for him given the past sort of couple of years.
Yeah, it would be an incredible move for him, actually. I was kind of laughing in my head there, thinking me and my better half were actually looking at potential, European games to maybe go travel to next season, and Roma was kind of one of the ones that were quite high up on the list. So I'm kind of sitting here imagining what my shock would have been like turning up to the Stadio Olimpico and thinking, looking over, into the dugout and thinking, God, Jose Mourinho looks a bit different, doesn't he? So thankfully that information was imparted on me before we went all the way to the Italian capital, so I'm grateful for that. But yeah, on Doig, it's a brilliant story. Really has been one of quite a few young Scots who have just sort of broken the mould in that sense and going abroad and just really making it work for them. Because I feel like I don't know if it's just me, there kind of so many. I feel there was a period of quite a few years where there was a kind of lot of young Scots maybe went abroad, and then sometimes you felt as though you just never heard from them again. But that kind of trend it seems to be completely flipped. And obviously, he is kind of right up there as one of the main success stories. So obviously, what a move that would be for young Josh Doig if indeed it does come to fruition. And we'll obviously bring you any more on that as we get it. But I think we're going to leave it there for today. I think we're all out of things to discuss, but we will be back over the next few days, hopefully with some more updates on all things Hibs for you. So just thank you as always for joining us. Thanks to Patrick for joining us. Just direct you to the ticker at the bottom of the page before we head off, www.hibsobserver.co.uk/subscribe for our current offer, which is £4 for 4 months. It's full access to all our content. We'll hopefully have some great stuff coming up for you across the close season. If you're watching on YouTube as well, if you're able to hit that subscribe button and help us continue and grow the channel, that is very much appreciated. But yeah, folks, thank you very much for joining us, and we shall see you again next time. Cheers.